Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for taking the time to be with us today. I'm Charlie Imbergamo, Director of Strategic Programs for the Nonprofit Leadership Center. Our NLC team is continuing to lean into our commitment and our capacity for adaptive change during these uncertain times, and we were alongside you in this process. Since the reality of social distancing has become a temporary new normal for us, our webinars have been one way that we've been pivoting to continue to develop and connect the nonprofit sector around critical issues. It's a pleasure for us to welcome each of you as participants in this webinar, Grant Writing in Times of Crisis. To recognize and celebrate the organizations present on this call, I'd ask you to take a moment to locate the chat box and to type the name of your organization into the chat right now. As we begin to see the names of the organizations popping up in our feed, take a moment to allow the potential for good represented in this community through these organizations to sink in for a moment. We're really fortunate today to have Julé Colvin with us. In addition to Julé's years of experience helping individuals and teams, both for-profit and nonprofit, to think and plan strategically, she's been a dedicated trainer for NLC. Many of you might have taken her grant writing certificate program with us. There have been hundreds of participants in that program. Julé holds a degree from Kent State University in Ohio. She's a certified coach, trainer, and speaker through the John Maxwell team. She's a business owner, a wife, a mother, grandmother, and community volunteer. But in addition to all those things, probably key is she's an unbelievably delightful person and a devoted leader in our community, and particularly for serving those most in need. It's an honor for me to introduce our moderator for today's webinar and my teammate, Karina Kletter, NLC's program associate. Karina has been instrumental in driving this work and these webinars. We simply would not be able to do it without her. She'll take us through some of the rules of the road for our time together today. Karina?
Welcome, everyone, and thank you again so much for coming into this webinar. A few rules: to minimize background noise and distractions. We'll keep all lines muted for the duration of the webinar. This session is being recorded and will be available on our website for future viewing. We warmly welcome your questions. Please type them in the chat box, and we'll take 10 to 15 minutes at the end of Julé's presentation for her to answer as many as we're able to get to. If you haven't found the chat box yet, you can go to the settings at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click on chat. We're looking forward to a productive, engaging session, and thank you so much for your participation. Take it away, Julé.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much. And you can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
All right, terrific. Well, I was already inspired just by your introduction today, Charlie, and looking and seeing all of names that I recognize and names that I don't recognize popping up, and realizing, as you said, taking a moment to let things sink in and think about just the great work that is being done. So I'm honored and very pleased to be with you today, albeit in a very difficult time for all of us. And thank you to the Nonprofit Leadership Center for providing this opportunity for us to gather in community as nonprofit leaders here, even virtually at this time. So my goal is to share some wisdom and experience with you today from grant writing from over the years, but also even that I'm just pretty much in real time learning day by day as we are going through this, and as I lead my team of grant writers. You know, personally, from a personal standpoint, today is kind of a significant day. in that this marks the end of week 4 of being in isolation with my husband. And so there is another great reason why I'm so excited to be on the call with you today and having an opportunity to talk with different folks. And but it also is the day that we would have started our spring session of the grant writing certificate course at the Nonprofit Leadership Center. And so certainly over the months that we've been preparing for that, we never imagined that instead of starting today, here we would be this afternoon doing a virtual training and all joining together. You know, if we were to go around, had the ability to go around the room here and gather all the stories, I know we would have a lot of them personally and business as a result of this. So going to get started here, and first picture we're looking at here is a cow. So yesterday as we were kind of working through this together, I said, okay, how does a cow start this? Well, let me tell you. So I'm from the Midwest, and while I didn't grow up on a farm, I love cities, so I'm very happy to be a city girl, but grew up in a very small rural town. But I had a pastor who used to always use this phrase when people didn't know what to do and they were just in this situation, I don't know what to do next. He would call it, it's like you're a cow at a new gate. So I think all of us resemble this in some way or another today. We're like a cow at a new gate. This is a totally new experience that we're all going through together, and there's just a lot to process, is there not? But I really believe, if I'm nothing else, I'm an optimist, and I really believe that we're going to get through this. We're going to get to the other side, and I'm very hopeful that our nonprofit community in the greater Tampa Bay area and the region and across the United States, that will be even stronger and better when we come out on the other side. I think we have to focus on that. And then, but I also believe that grants are a key component to that. And so that's our point of getting together today as we discuss that. So with all of that in mind, I want to start the way I always start the grant writing certificate course, and that's with inspiration. You know, because grant writing is more than just the facts and the figures. When we get into it, I know there are people on the call who are grant writers, and then those who are leaders of nonprofit organizations or development directors. And but for those of us who are in the day-to-day grant writing and knowing we need to dot all our I's, cross all our T's, perhaps we could forget and sign the paper in black ink instead of blue ink and it would be thrown away. I mean, there's just so many crazy things around that, that it can get to be pretty overwhelming. And so I just want to encourage you today, in the midst of everything else that we're going through, just to really remember why the heck we're doing all of this detailed work and trying to rush to meet deadlines, and especially now, it can be very, very stressful. I always say in that course that I believe grant writing is a calling, and that when you step into that, if you choose to see it as that calling, is you have this opportunity to help people that you will probably never meet. And so you're describing the story and telling the story of these folks who are in need in your organization. And you get the opportunity to introduce them to these folks who have the ability to be able to help them. And what an amazing, amazing thing to be able to do. And especially now when we feel so hopeless of often, how can I even help or have impact here? So a key thing to be thinking about around that. So I wanted to share, I like to tell stories, so I wanted to share the story of a Jewish girl by the name of Esther, who very unexpectedly became the queen. And her uncle at one point, once she had become queen, came to her and told her that there was an evil man who was plotting to destroy the Jewish nation and that lived within that kingdom, and that it was time for her to go and approach the king and tell the king about this plight. And she said, and we could all understand this, how can I do that? Even as his wife, if I go before the king without being asked, he could order to have me killed. And we hear then this famous line that most of you have probably heard on the call. He says to her, Esther, how do you know that you haven't been made queen for such a time as this? And so I'm not saying that we're, certainly to the stature of Esther, but I would just like to encourage you to think of yourself as a type of a modern day Esther, as a grant writer, or even in whatever role you're playing in your nonprofit, as you're going before people who have the means to help and have this opportunity to help people that you may never meet. So there's my dose of inspiration and motivation for the day, and I hope that will help you in this journey. So I want to start with a little bit here of how we'll be moving through this. Things are moving at a crazy speed right now in the grant world, and while we may feel stuck in our houses, that things are moving at a tortoise pace. I saw something on Facebook the other day that said, this week was the longest year I've ever experienced, and certainly it just is crazy with that. But things are changing a lot in the grant world, and even today I had sent my presentation to Karina yesterday, and today needed to update it with new information that I had learned. But with all of that in mind, we are, as I said, it's like being a cow at a new gate. We're learning new things. And this is what I know today. What I'm sharing with you now is what I know today. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about clients and nonprofits that we're talking with. I do lead a team of grant writers. There are a dozen of us, and we're working with nonprofits of all types and sizes here in Tampa Bay and across the country. And so we are really deep in the trenches every day, writing grants and researching and finding information, just as many of you are doing. So I'm excited to be able to share what we're learning with you. So I want to start by building a framework by which I'm going to talk about strategies later. And early on, when all of this started to happen, I started thinking about what might this look like as we move forward. And it is an important time as leaders for us to be brainstorming and thinking into the future about what may happen. So I started thinking about the types of clients that we have and the organizations we're working with. And I really see two types of organizations right now that we can categorize, kind of different ends of the continuum, and then others that fall in the middle. So for the purposes of our discussion today, I would like to encourage you to think of yourself either for that first bullet, you're a nonprofit who's providing what we're calling now, or I'm calling, mission critical type of services. So you are still, your boots on the ground, you're feeding people, you're making sure that people have housing, working with medical care. There's a whole host of other things, but we'll just to give you the idea of what I'm talking about there in mission critical. Then if you go to the third bullet, on the other end of the continuum are the nonprofits who you're in a position where you're closed down. Staff is all working remotely. You probably have laid off a lot of your staff. I mean, I've had conversations here even this week where one organization had laid off 100 plus, furloughed 100 plus staff people, and they had just the executive team that was working remotely. So we've got those two ends of the continuum. And then we have some of you who fall in the middle there in that second bullet, that you're not really providing mission critical services right now, but you are continuing to provide services in some way. And for the most part, what I'm seeing that be is online type of services. And really the Nonprofit Leadership Center is a good example of that. They're not providing services like they typically do in their building, their wonderful training space, but have said, okay, how do we react to this? And have jumped on and provided this great opportunity for us to learn in this way. So as we move forward in building this framework, I find your place in that continuum, if you would. Now, I also started thinking early on in the process about the types of funders and how I thought this would play out. And it's been encouraging to see that indeed this is how it's playing out. We have those funders who are in the mission critical lane, and they're going to stay there. So they typically fund housing programs, food programs, medical types of programs. They know that they're going to jump in and they're going to stay in that lane during this time. We're already seeing them now start to come out. And it was interesting. I don't know about the rest of you, but I felt like in the beginning when we really started to see this is serious and we're heading towards some uncharted territories here, that it felt like the funders kind of went silent for a while. It was just like chirping noise. And it took them a little bit to kind of, even in these mission critical lanes, kind of figure out what they were going to do. And I know that even with the Nonprofit Leadership Center, they had some funders approach them and say, we need you to do some surveying for us of nonprofits so that we can even know what the needs are out there. And so NLC jumped in and did that and was able to provide that feedback. And after several days, we started to see then all of these kinds of notices come out, which I'll talk more specifically about specific funders later on in this time together. And then there are those, and number two, they're not typically in the mission critical lane. So they might typically fund youth programs, but they see that this need is so great that they're saying, we're going to jump in and respond to this crisis. An example right now of that is the Raise Foundation. So they normally are working, they fund youth types of programming, and they might go a little bit off of that, but typically youth kinds of programs. They early on then stepped out and said, okay, we really want to help. And so we've already had a grant, or several grants, one, I can talk about that later, from the Raise Foundation to help with the COVID-19 crisis. And then we'll find this third type of funder are those who are not in the mission critical lane, they have not been, and they're going to stay in their lane. So they have different reasons for that, and I'll talk about that in our next slide. But they figure, hey, these other funders know what they're doing. We're going to stay where we are. So if they've been interested, or they have been funding arts or museums, they're going to stay in that lane. And I think that we'll be able to categorize all the different types of funders that come forward here within some varying degree of these three areas. Now, if we think about where funders are right now, so state of the nation, this is a state of the funders. Even though I am an optimist, I definitely don't want to come across as I'm sugarcoating everything. The reality is that there are going to be funders who are going to pause their giving right now, or they're going to stop their giving, largely based on losses in the stock market or impact that's been on their business. Another example, we talked with a funder last week who they give typically in basic needs, and they do a big fundraiser at the beginning of the year. They didn't get to do it. And they're associated with a corporation, and that corporation is being greatly impacted by this. So they've said at this point, and the reason I'm not saying their name is because they're not certain yet at this point, but they're thinking they're not going to give in the spring, that they probably won't give again until the fall. So we definitely are going to see that happen. I do believe that corporate funders, and we are seeing them, especially at a national level, really start to come forward. Part of that, I think, will be because of the importance of social responsibility and corporate social responsibility. Over the last few years, we've seen that really, really grow in importance, and in part of protecting a corporation's brand, they're expected to be seen as, philanthropic. And so I'm not saying that they wouldn't want to give anyways, but there will be some pressure around that for them to continue to be involved. And certainly we're already seeing those with big hearts, step up to the plate. I think where we'll see the most pausing at this point will be with these family and individual funders or foundations. They will have been hit financially with stock market issues and the like. And so, not saying that will be across the board, but that's what I'm expecting to see as we move forward. So we're still kind of finishing up this framework of going forward here. So as you identify now where you fit within all of this, the big message that I want to get out there today is that there are opportunities out there. They're continuing to come out. And regardless of where you fit, whether you're mission critical or not mission critical or somewhere in between, I'm saying now is not the time to stop your grant seeking. And I'm going to give you some strategies on that. But if you think about grant seeking in the midst of all of the other type of fundraising, so when I teach about fundraising or teach about grant writing during the course at the Nonprofit Leadership Center, we always talk about, this is one, you want to have, funders are looking for stable organizations who have a variety of funding sources. And that includes events. Well, events have now been canceled or they're on hold. There are individual donors. Well, organizations are struggling to know, how do they interact with their donors, especially maybe some key donors, and then what is it even appropriate to do that at this point? I read a good article on the Chronicle of Philanthropy today about that very thing, and what they said was probably want to be really careful about how you maneuver through that right now, and you might want to pause how you are approaching some of those, especially major donors. There's certainly foundations also, they're uncertain about their finances, and there may be some real issues around that. I was just speaking to a client this week who had an individual who gave $100,000 to them every year through his foundation, and it was for general operating support, and he pulled back on it. So those kinds of things certainly will happen. A lot of your services are on hold. So even those of you who do fee for services, and either you have people paying you or you might have a funder who pays you for per person served, when you're not able to offer services, that's very difficult. I know some of you are working on that by providing online services, and fortunately a lot of the funders are saying that's fine. But when we think about all of that, and we think about where's grant writing in that, we are now at a place, and especially for grant writers who usually, I hear this so often for those who work for a specific nonprofit, it's so hard to get things done in the office because you have people coming in and out and all the noise of them coming out. You're now at your home, pretty much everyone is, and you've got this opportunity to still be that person who's called to write these proposals on behalf of the people who are in need to the people who have the ability to do that. Nothing is going to stop you from that writing those things, although there may be certainly a reduction in opportunities. Now, I did want to share, too, some lessons from the housing crisis. Now, I know certainly this is much different in many ways than that, but for me, it's the only thing that I know to compare it to. I started Pathways to Growth back in around 2007. The housing market started crashing 2008. I recently heard, I think that the real hit didn't happen to the nonprofit community until a couple of years later. But we, as a company, continued to flourish and expand during those difficult years, and our clients continued to grow and to win grants. We started with clients back then that many of them we still have today. So the potential is still out there. Again, I realize that this is different, and it's going to depend on the length of the crisis. Kind of depends on what station you listen to know kind of where we are in that. It looks like we've got some curves starting to flatten out sooner than what we thought. So perhaps all of these very difficult things that we were hearing are not going to be as bad, but we don't know that. So, but I still believe, and we're experiencing now, that we are writing grants like crazy. We are super busy. with all of that. Now, I also want to say here to remember that momentum is a leader's best friend. Now, for those of you who have ever read any of John Maxwell's books or have ever listened to him, he is a leadership guru. Last I knew, he'd written 72 books on leadership. And one of them is the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And he talks about momentum. He says it's a leader's best friend. He said it hides all kinds of problems that you might have as long as you have momentum and you keep going. So I want to encourage you to not lose your momentum. When you do lose momentum and you stop, it's very hard to get restarted. So if you think about, you've got this big boulder, which kind of feels like where we are right now, trying to move this boulder forward. And if we haven't completely stopped, it's going to take a while to get it going. But if we just maybe slow it down or adjust it a little bit, some of it will still continue to go full force. We have a lot of clients we're going full force with. But it will be difficult if you're just standing still. So I want to encourage you to take these strategies that I'm getting ready to present to you and continue moving forward. So now I'm going to talk about kind of the two different places that your organization would fit within, which the mission critical and the non-mission critical, and in between that, and some strategies that I would recommend. First of all, I would say start with your current funders. So if you are already receiving grant funds, reaching out to your current funders and asking them, can we take the money that we have, here's our situation, can we take this money that we wrote for this program and move it over to here to what we're doing? We are already hearing funders who are doing that. I was directly impacted by one of those. So I would greatly encourage you to do that. If you're able to pick up the phone and call them, send them an email, although it feels like to me my email box is like exploded like never before. So whether you want to do that or send a snail mail, a letter that might be different, but approach them to see if they could help you with some of the issues that you're facing now. Remember that opportunities are growing daily. Just like I said earlier, there are opportunities that keep coming out, and I already had to adjust what I was going to be talking about today. A key thing is to remember to respond quickly. A lot of these opportunities, or many of these opportunities, are a first come, first served. But in the midst of that, make sure you're putting good product out there, that you're putting together a good, solid proposal as much as possible. Try to balance that out. We heard today that the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay has already given a grant to one of our clients, and United Way, let's see, it was like about $36,000 already in that COVID-19 money that came out, which I'll talk about later on, that has already been awarded. So you need to be able to respond quickly. Certainly, getting on the Foundation Center or any other similar organization or databases that you might use, and start new research. Start looking around disaster preparedness, emergency response. Get out there and find out what's available for you. Find out about different funders that you know that might be doing this. Stalk their websites, because they might not have anything one day and the next day they're rolling something new out. So sign up for their newsletters. Make sure you're really keeping on top of that. Now, also I want to encourage you to really be thinking short-term and long-term in this in terms of innovation. So later on, I'll talk about thinking like a business, and so I don't want to go into too much detail about that now. But this is not only you thinking about where you are right now with the clients or the folks that you're helping, but taking time to process with your leadership team, where do you think things might be 4 to 6 months from now? And with that, then, what kind of funding might you need then? And really start to put those kinds of ideas together and continue to meet with your team talking about that. Several years ago, I went to a business luncheon and I heard this gentleman speak, and he said, if you're not already at this place in your thinking because things are moving so quickly, you're not just right here, you're already behind. So we are really in one of those places where you need to be thinking, hey, what if this happened? What if this happened? What if this happened? What would that mean for us? And I'll go into a little more detail about that later. There will be federal opportunities because of the CARES Act that will be coming up next. And actually, I was a little bummed today because I'm not going to have as much to share with you about that. We actually, one of my team members is, as we speak, on a call, a national level call, gathering more information about these federal opportunities through the CARES Act that are going to be coming out. I'm going to list those, the different areas here towards the end of the presentation. But one of the things I want to make sure to say is be thinking now about ways to collaborate. We've been over the last 6 years, 7 years in grant writing. In my grant writing experience started well over 30 years ago. This whole concept of collaboration has become more important and more important in your grant seeking, and it will be really important in these federal types of grants. If we want to see the most money come into the greater Tampa Bay area, for example, collaboration will be very important during that. So for those of you who are larger organizations, you could probably go and apply for those on your own. What I'm asking you to do is think about what are other organizations you could bring along with you as you do this. Not just play well in the sandbox, so to speak, and bring along some others who could help you with some other parts of what you need to do. So anyways, be thinking about collaboration, and I don't even think it's too early to start reaching out to other potential collaborative partners or even ones that you're already working with. All right, so thanks for the patience for those of you who are kind of in that not mission critical kind of space. I'm going to start with sharing some things that are very similar to the other group, but then in my next slide, also be talking about some different things. What I do want I encourage you to do is tomorrow, this afternoon, if you haven't already done this, begin to define the specifics of how this crisis has already impacted or will impact your nonprofit and the people that you serve. And don't assume that you cannot apply for crisis-centered, COVID-19 crisis-centered grants. So I'm going to give you an example that I just found out about in our team with one of our clients today. They serve foster children. Now, obviously, we know we don't want to ignore foster children during this crisis. They applied for United Way COVID-19 funding, and they were already awarded that. The key thing they needed to know, they're not out there serving the general population. They're serving a very specific group of folks. And what they needed to be able to do was very succinctly describe how it is now impacting their organization and how they expect it to in the future. You need to have that in a really well-stated kind of needs statement at this point as you're moving forward with your proposals. You'll find that some funders won't really even change their format, their proposal format much, other than to add a question about COVID-19. So you want to really be working on that. Then again, start with your current funders. Will they allow you to change some of your funding over to overhead? Will they help you address your crisis issues? I'm already seeing that happen with our clients. Again, get on the Foundation Center, start new research, make sure you're responding quickly to RFPs, get on the website, signing up for newsletters. You need to be a ninja researcher at this point to find out everything that's going on. Again, thinking short-term, long-term, even if you're not boots on the ground right now out there, but thinking about, okay, this is where we are right now. if this happens, this happens. Come up with some scenario planning of what could happen and what your responses could be and what that may look like for you in terms of what you might need to apply for grants for. Again, federal opportunities will be coming, and now is a good time for you to think about ways that you can collaborate and approach other organizations who might be doing similar things. See if there are ways that you can apply together. You're more likely to be able to win grants at the federal level, especially if you have that collaboration going. Now, again, some more information for those of you who are not doing direct services right now. I want to encourage you to spend time preparing for your future. So you won't always be working right up to the deadline. So those of us who have been in the grant writing world for a long time know that here at our team, our goal is always to have grants done a week ahead of time. But just like you within your organizations have to wait for people to get information for you, and often it puts you right up against the deadline. We're waiting on clients to give us things, and we often, or not often, but sometimes we'll end up in that position. So if you don't have a grant calendar, build a grant calendar. If you do, either way, be looking out into the future. We know that grants typically take, in this COVID-19 emergency kind of place, we're not seeing this. Things are coming out quickly, but typically it's 3 to 6 months before you find out whether you win a grant. And at the federal level, even longer than that. It'll be interesting to see how well they're able to roll out money quickly. But be writing for what you think it's going to look like when it's over. This is a time to be perfecting what you're writing and have it waiting for the future. There might be some missing data in there. One of the things we do, and I teach this in the grant writing course, to write everything that you can, put X's and question marks in there for things that you're going to need to be able to gather later in terms of statistics, but you can write the framework of those grants and spend that time getting ahead so you can hit the ground running, remembering your momentum, is continuing to go there. It's also, and I want to mention a client that I had a conversation with a week or so ago about the 3 to 6 month thing. She said, Julé, we are continuing grant writing. They're in the after school services space. And they said, we can't imagine a world in which kids weren't back to school in the fall. So now is the time for us to still be putting those grants together and at least getting the basics of those done and submitting as much as we can for those months ahead. So again, encouraging you to do that. Spend this time researching, updating your statistics, looking at your measurable outcomes and looking at yourself and saying, how grant ready are we? For those of you who have been in my course, know I spend a lot of time talking about grant readiness. How competitive are you? Are there some things that you could do to improve? Updating your story, developing some visuals and some infographics. Those are great ways to tell your story to the funder and break up all of the narrative and present things in a way that is easy to understand. I always teach about the art and science of grant writing, that you want to reach the funder's mind, you want to reach their heart so that you can reach their pocketbook or their wallet. So now is still the time to be thinking about how you're going to do that. So bottom line, as I started to mention earlier, is you really must think like a funder with this. This is a business. You need to be planning ahead and innovating, creating new methods and services. And here's this word now that has become a famous word in the midst of COVID-19, pivot. I think we'll be tired of hearing that word by the time it's all over. But being flexible and knowing that you're going to need to be able to pivot as things move forward. I heard this, this was something that I read this morning from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and you'll have a copy of this, so looking at the time, I don't have time to go over all of this, but you want to look at making sure that you put in a short statement to your donors how you are going to respond to this, how you're going to make up for any lost revenue or interest, how you're going to pay back loans and start your programs and services, cutting the budget. Assure them that you're making strategic choices for your core program. So this is very important to be able to have that in writing and how you're going to encapsulate that with grant funders moving forward. So here's some current local grant updates. Of course, we have the United Way that came out early on in this. Hey, here's what we're going to do. But many of you on the line probably also applied for a major grant that they were doing that was due in February. I think we wrote 7 of those, so they were kind of a bear. And so they are still moving forward with those. We were kind of wondering in the beginning when they came out with the COVID-19 funds, were they going to sack the other side or not? Well, they went ahead and sent out some additional questions they had for the previous grant and gave nonprofits the ability to answer those. I think they had 5 days to turn that around. And then they're also offering the COVID funds. If you haven't looked at that, take a look at that. Same thing with the Community Foundation of Tampa Bay, specific COVID-19 funds there. And we did already have a client get $15,000 from there. The Pinellas County Social Action Funds, those came out as normal beginning of April. They're due towards the end of April, so I would encourage you to take a look at those. And then just last night or the night before, I don't know, I kind of tried to remember all this. I think it was last night. I saw that the Pinellas Community Foundation has developed this resiliency fund in collaboration with some other funders. So if funders are collaborating, folks, nonprofits need to be collaborating. So I think it was the Healthy St. Pete Foundation. I can't remember who the other ones were that are going together with them in this resiliency fund. So take a look at that. I want to say Wells Fargo has been moving forward. I don't know if they've closed that opportunity, but the reason I wanted to bring this up is because Wells Fargo could be seen as one. They're more in the community economic development space a lot of the time. You might think that they might not be moving forward, but we did also just hear, for those of you who are in non-mission critical type of organizations, one of our museum clients was just last week awarded a grant from Wells Fargo. I believe that they asked them for an update of how COVID-19 was impacting them, and then they resubmitted that, and they were funded. And then I've already mentioned with the raise, I think we've had 4 of our clients win with the raise here just in the last week. So I do want to quickly mention, I keep looking over this way because I was telling Charlie and Karina that I wanted to make sure I was timing myself well to leave you time for questions. And I have 1 clock in my house, and so I brought my clock from the kitchen and I set it over here. So that's why I keep looking over there. But you kind of have to be under a rock probably at this point if you haven't heard about some of the stimulus funding. The SBA Economic Injury Loan, I provided the website there. Nonprofits definitely qualify for that. So I encourage you to find out what that's all about. It is a loan, but it's at a very low interest rate. I've heard talk that they're even going to lower it, potentially lower than what it already is. It's something that you could spread the payment out for 30 years if you needed to. I know none of us like to think about doing that, but this is a very different time. And even if you didn't end up needing it, it would be great to get approved. And then if you just said, no, I don't need it, or you just paid it back right away, that would be a great way to approach some of this. I've looked at that as a business owner, that I have a responsibility to do that, because I want to make sure that I can protect my clients with our services and continue going on and protect all of the payroll of all of my team to keep them moving forward at this time. Now, speaking of payroll, the next thing is the Paycheck Protection Plan. I've heard it called Paycheck and Payroll. I've provided the link there. This is one that you apply through your bank, through an SBA lender bank. I just heard one of my clients sent me an email late last night that they've already been approved for $110,000. But what the great thing about this is, there are some, I don't have time to go into details of all this, you can certainly look it up, but there is a portion of this that as long as you keep your clients or keep your staff members up until a certain date, that it would be forgiven. And you have to apply for that forgiveness, but there'll be portions of that that would be forgiven. And right now it's at 2.5 months of payroll. And so what a wonderful thing. That's like a grant that you would be getting at this time. So I really want to encourage you to do that. So last thing I have here, Karina, I think I can be done in a minute, is looking at these government grants through the CARES Act. For those of you who aren't, as we called it before, doing mission critical work, and again, I'm sorry for kind of the terminology that I'm using, because I know that there are very critical types of things that you are providing day in and day out, year in and year out to our communities. And so I don't mean to diminish that at all. We're just talking about kind of this place where we are right now. But look at all of this. We've got child nutrition, SNAP, emergency food, aging and disability, Indian affairs, community services block grants, different from the community development block grants. So we need to make sure we really keep an eye open for those, because those will come into our cities, will come into our counties, and those will come down from the federal government more into a local level, and great opportunities. Head Start, arts and humanities, so they're not being left out of this. Museums and library sciences. Again, the community development block grants, domestic violence, runaway and homeless youth. So there are going to be lots of opportunities as we move forward for that. So I also want to encourage you, I've provided here, we have a couple of websites, our Pathways to Growth website, our Grant Pathways website, if you want to sign up for the updates, because we really are, the way we're looking at our business right now is we want to go above and beyond, and our team has discussed there's really not any job that's not ours right now in helping our clients to get to where they need to be. And so we're out there researching, going to all kinds of webinars, everything, trying to keep up to date on the top of the line kinds of things. We also have found that independentsector.org has had a lot of updates that we have found to be really helpful. And of course, the Nonprofit Leadership Center is doing a great job of posting and articles and blogs, and also offering these webinars. So I'm going to turn it back over to Karina for some questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers. So here's a little plaque that I bought for myself and two of my staff members who typically are in my office at Christmas time, having no idea how true this might be. Can't guarantee I'll have the answers, but this is, I'm pretty sure I have no idea. Let's hope that that's not any of my answer there. So thank you, Karina.
Thank you so much, Julé. I think that you will have some answers, but we've been warned. So first question from Kevin Leary. Is there a specific application for the RAISE COVID-19 response?
Oh boy, that's I'm pretty sure I have no idea. No, that's I would just go to their website. I have not heard that, but you know what? If you would please email me, I've put my email address here. I'm not really involved in the day-to-day with the relationships with the nonprofits. My writing team and the team manager are doing that, but I am happy to find that out for you and share that with you. So please do not hesitate to email me on that.
Great, thank you, Julé. The next question comes from Heidi Aspinwall, and Heidi asks, is the SBA loan available for faith-based organizations?
My understanding is yes, so I would definitely dig into that. Now, I will say one of the things that's been frustrating for me, and by the way, hi Heidi, but it has been, Heidi and I know each other, so it has been difficult because even with the paycheck protection, things have gone back and forth and back and forth. And I do remember seeing something about the faith-based side, and my understanding was that indeed they could apply for that SBA economic injury loan.
Okay, thank you, Julé. The next question comes from Sanam Charlton. Are there any other specific examples other than Foundation Center for grant search?
Well, it is the one that we consider to be the gold standard. So I know there are some others out there. But I even hesitate to mention them by name because I have found that the Foundation Center, and I'm not getting any commission or kickbacks on this, but I've really found them to be the best. There's a grant station that I've been receiving some things from. There's another one that I think is just called Foundation Search. But we really have tried a lot of different ones, and we found that the Foundation Center has just been the best for us.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question comes from Angie KG, and Angie asks, what's the difference between the economic injury loan versus the PPP, and are you allowed to apply for both?
Yes, hi Angie. I know Angie also. So yes, so you can apply for both. And with the economic injury loan, this can go for, I think the cap is $2 million, might be higher than that because they've been changing that. But it can be for a variety of operating expenses and a much broader scope than with, but that one you apply through the SBA website that I provided. And I have to tell a little bit of a story about that. I was so much trying to be on top of this for my company that as soon as I found out about it, I spent a Saturday doing the whole application, and it was very complicated. And I had uploaded all kinds of documents, and then I was planning on going back in on that Tuesday and finishing it and submitting it. And when I went back on Tuesday, the whole website had changed. And after an hour and 45 minutes on hold to get an answer to see if I could get my data back and have something I could work on, the answer was no, it was all gone. So now it's much more simple. And basically when you fill that out, what I've been told is it's like you're in a deli line and you've gotten your number at Publix, for your sandwich, and that gives you a number, and then they start to communicate with you what you need to provide next. With the payroll, paycheck protection, you do that through, you'd want to start first with your bank that you do banking with and see if they are an SBA lender, and then they'll have their process that they would walk you through. Now, you'll have to be careful if you were to get both of those, that you're not double dipping, certainly. So, but you can definitely apply for both, and they work in conjunction with each other.
Thank you so much, Julé. I think we have just one more question. And anybody, if I've missed your question, please redirect my attention. And Michael Thomas, I believe, asks how to get more information on your grant writing classes. I think I can answer that one and direct everyone to the Nonprofit Leadership Center website at nlctb.org. And that gives you information on how to sign up for Julé's grant writing classes with us. Julé, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I do not. I certainly would love to have you take the course. We have a great time. It's a 16-hour course. We typically meet 4 days in a month, usually the same day of the week for 4 hours in the morning, and we have a great time together. So would love to see you.
Thank you again, Julé. And I think I've got all of the questions. If I missed you, you could raise your hand and and I will come back around to you. I see some requests for adding the websites for particular resources. When we post this recording, which should be within the next day, we'll add also links to any of the resources that have been mentioned here. So if there are no more questions, let's see, Charlotte Williams. Charlotte, could you retype your question for me? I'm not seeing it in the chat box. And Giselle, we'll add the Foundation Center website to the resources page, unless Charlie, if you can grab that and put that in the chat box now, that would possibly be helpful for people to see now, but that will disappear once we close out the Zoom. Another question from Giselle, who does Wells Fargo provide grants to, and what is their requirement? Do you have an answer to that, Julé?
Oh, I don't. You're right at my fingertips. I do know that they have typically been, I mean, it's nonprofits, typically more economic and community development focused. I can certainly give you some more information on that if you email me, and anyone certainly feel free to email me for further information. I will say that I used to pride myself on answering in 24 hours. I can't guarantee that at this point, but I'd be happy to give you more information on that one. But that's typically been my experience. It's more around the economic development and community development, less around human services, but certainly that could be changing.
Okay, I think this is the last question we have time for. We're coming up on 3:30. Connie Rose is asking for a copy of How to Write a Grant for Victims to Survivors, an anti-sex trafficking organization. Do you have any resources that we could point her to, Julé?
So how to write a grant, was that the question?
I think so. I think it's how to write a grant for that specific sort of nonprofit organization. But how to write a grant in general is probably
equally helpful. So, and what was the type of organization again?
Anti-sex trafficking.
Okay, yeah, certainly there's a lot out there right now around that. So a couple of things I could say is if you do a YouTube search of grant writing, there is probably about the fourth video down. I have a 1 hour more intro to grant writing type of webinar that you could look at. And I'm just trying to think if I have any samples or anything that I could share. And I just don't believe I have anything around the sex trafficking side. But that would be that webinar would be good for, it goes definitely into more detail about the grant writing. And then it's, feel free to email me again and see if I can dig up something for you, but I just can't come up with something off the top of my head that would be a good example around that.
Sure. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time. Thank you, Julé, so much for taking those questions. Thank you for this incredibly informative and timely presentation. Thank you to everyone that participated today. Please reach out to us if you have any questions, and keep your eyes open for the recording and for our upcoming webinars.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.